everybody, and welcome to the 15-Minute Book Club. And if you're new to us, basically what we do is we welcome an author onto the show, and we give them a grand total of 15 minutes to convince you to buy their book. And this week, we've got an interesting one. So Alex, and different cat to the one we had this week, if you see them bouncing around behind her, who have we got with us this week?
Today we've got Phil Tinline with us. And Phil, tell us the title of your book.
The title of my book is Ghosts of Iron Mountain, the hoax that duped America and its sinister legacy.
So this is going to be good. So
Yeah.
15 minutes. Ready to start the clock, Boney?
I am. I've just in all things, I think I've messed the timer up on every single one of our episodes. So you're probably going to get slightly more than 15 minutes. So there's no pressure here, Phil. But okay, right. Your 15 minutes begin now.
Okay, so for people that don't know, Phil, outline this hoax that duped America.
Okay, so this began in 1966 when the Vietnam War is really beginning to hot up. And it looks for a moment like peace might break out. And a strange thing happens on Wall Street. You might think that shares would go up in price, but in fact, they dip. This is what was called a peace scare, because the implication was that war was quite good for shareholders and people trading shares. And there's three young lefty satirists sitting in their little office just off Washington Square Park who see this in the papers and they think, hang on a second, this seems a bit off. Why are shares going up? And then it gives them an idea. They think, what if we concocted the story of a top secret government report where a bunch of top flight experts have been asked to work out what would happen to America if permanent global peace broke out. The joke being it would wreck society, wreck the economy, and you'd have to do terrible things to replace the beneficial effects of war, like reintroduce slavery and eugenics and poison the rivers and get young men to play blood games and that kind of thing. And so they take this to a publisher, and this being the mid-60s, before things start to really go into the dark, there's this larky but very serious publisher, James Baldwin, published Norman Mailer, says, yeah, fine, we'll publish that. Before they've even written anything, we'll publish that, and we won't tell our sales staff that it's not fiction. So they then decide they need to kind of find a writer to work with them on this. And he says, well, I can't write the story of the suppression of this report unless I write the actual report. And so he does. He writes a 28,000 word report, which I have here, which is called Report from Iron Mountain, on the possibility and desirability of peace. And this is sort of scoped out in great sort of think tanky detail with lots of real footnotes to real documents and so on. Anyway, this is published eventually in November 1967, and there's a big hullabaloo about it. The New York Times think, hang on, is this real? And they phone the White House, and the White House, poor guy on the phone or whatever, says, well, I'll have to check. There's an investigation in the White House. I've got the memos going all the way up to President Johnson, investigation in the Pentagon, and so on. And eventually people start to think, hang on a second, surely nobody in the government was actually advocating reintroducing slavery in the event of peace. And so people start to think, well, who, if this is a hoax, who did it? And Noam Chomsky is beginning to become really prominent by this point because of the Vietnam War. But some people think it's him. Henry Kissinger is just beginning to become prominent. He's still at Harvard, but a sort of serious guy involved in peace negotiations in Vietnam. And a whole bunch of other people are the usual, sort of unusual suspects for the hoax. But eventually it sort of dies away. No one really knows who did it until 5 years later. The Pentagon Papers have published this big revelation of how the government has been lying to the American public for years about what's really going on in Vietnam. And so eventually the guy who had written the report, Leonard Lewin, who on the front is sort of pretends he's just the guy who got the leak from one of the insiders, he says it was us. And the reason we did it was because the only way you could get people to think about the madness of the Vietnam War and, in his view, the nuclear deterrent is actually kind of confront them with their own logic extended a few steps further. And then it just disappears, because by the 1970s, when America is in a crisis of energy and a crisis of confidence, and you have Watergate and all the rest of it, the idea of having so much money you have to blow it on war seems like a nice problem to have. And so it stays like that until 1990, and Lewis tried to get it republished. He talks to publishers. Nobody's interested. It seems like a relic from another age. And then in 1990, he hears that at last it has been republished. It's just been republished by fascists who think it's real. Some of the pioneers of Holocaust denial in America have seized on this document, thinking that it's the smoking gun, revealing the dark bar at the heart of power and its conspiracies against real Americans. So they republish it, which I've also got. This is the the fascist reprinting, for which they had no permission, literally tore the cover off this one, photocopied it and rebound it. And on the back, it says secret protocols or brilliant satire. And you can imagine what a bunch of people who are involved in Holocaust denial think of secret protocols means. And this influences not that the people concerned were themselves anti-Semitic in any way at all, but this influences Oliver Stone's movie JFK. It influences the militia movement. It influences a whole extra hoax that's created called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. So if you listen closely, you can still hear Alex Jones citing. That appears in QAnon. You can see traces of it in the X-Files, and it just ramifies and ramifies. You see it in the Oath Keepers not long before January the 6th and so on. And so it's just this idea that there is this cabal at the heart of power who mean Americans ill is so compelling and so pre-established in people's minds that when you have a real document, as it seems, that shows that this is what's really going on, it's very hard to persuade people that it's a hoax, even though they said it was a hoax the year before I was born.
It is basically, this is a highbrow joke that's gone way over everybody's heads, isn't it? It's a joke that is funny if you get it, but if you don't, you just it's well above you.
Right, and there's something about you know the feeling, right? I mean, I certainly you make a joke and it doesn't land. That's not the fault of the person who's not laughing, right? If it doesn't land, it's on you. Now, it landed really hard. It did what they wanted. It exposed the kind of arguments that they wanted to make. But once it's been taken on by the far right and they will not believe that it's not real, you know, you're kind of stuck. I mean, one of my favorite stories of this is I interviewed Julie Lewin, the daughter of Leonard Lewin. And as it happens, in the 1980s, she, for a brief time, was dating a guy called Ralph Sherman, who was he was sort of quite far left. He'd worked in the 60s with Bertrand Russell on a kind of campaign to do a sort of tribunal and absentia of the war criminals of Vietnam and so on. He's also a massive JFK conspiracy theorist. And he's working with a guy called Dick Gregory, who's an truly extraordinary figure. Do you know who Dick Gregory was?
I do, because I've read the book. But
right, yeah, okay, yeah.
You might want to straight
there. But did you know who he was before? I'm just interested.
No clue.
Okay, so this guy is a genuine original, really brave. He's a black stand-up comedian in the 60s who is doing stand-up in a way that nobody had really done before. He's kind of he comes before Richard Pryor and people like that. He's really groundbreaking. He's really funny. He's really brave. He puts his life and his body on the line to fight for civil rights. He goes on hunger strike. He is a really genuinely heroic guy. He's also a massive JFK conspiracy theorist as well, and he's working with Ralph Sherman. So one day, Ralph and Julie are sitting there, and Dick Gregory phones up with the latest tidbit he's got about who killed JFK, and starts telling him about a report from Iron Mountain. And Ralph says, "No, Dick, I'm sitting next to the daughter of the guy who wrote it." And Dick Gregory says, no, he has to say that. The CIA will kill him. And it's just that you can't get past that. You can't get past, if you've been told it's a hoax and that becomes part of the cover story, then it's kind of adamantine. And so I think that's one reason it's lasted for so long.
You mentioned bringing back slavery. Just how outlandish were their predictions for what would happen if peace returned globally, or broke out? Because I don't think we've ever had it.
Right. Well, so, I mean, A, obviously permanent global peace is like, you know, a thought experiment that's never going to happen, right? But B, what they're talking about there is not, I should be clear, they're not talking about the kind of horrific history of Atlantic chattel slavery as we would be more specific about it now. They're talking more about effectively forcibly conscripting young men. It's a satirical exaggeration of what was happening to young men in America who were being drafted into the army, who, I mean, in many cases were black, but they're not talking about it in the context of the 18th century or the 19th century. But the point is to kind of take the existing, as you do with satire, to take the existing situation and push it to the point of intolerable absurdity. The underlying thought for a lot of it is that the point of the beneficial effect of war is not only that it's supposedly economically helpful. I mean, there's a lot of genuine debate about that at the time, some of which finds its way into the report, but also the idea that without war, you can't really have a nation state, because if you don't have an enemy, where's the border? And so it's this sense that if you don't have a unifying enemy, you'd have to poison the rivers and create gross environmental pollution in order to create a kind of a unifying force. Or you might have to invent alien scares, although I think that won't work. Ironically, actually, I have spoken to somebody since who has, I think, done a little bit of experimentation with, if you start telling people who disagree with each other that UFOs are real, do they start to unite? But I shouldn't go into more of that. But no, the idea of gross environmental pollution is one that spins off really interestingly, because they say, well, that's one possibility for unifying people, but it would take a generation and a half to do it. Now, this is 1967, right? So in 1990, 1991, when this report comes back out, thanks to the fascists, people start saying, oh, 1967, add a generation and a half, that's now. That must be why the Rio summit is happening, talking about the environment. This is the secret cabal having plotted in 1967, because they're so clever and prescient, that what we will need after the Cold War is a new unifying enemy. That's why they're inventing all this stuff about climate change and the environment. It's all a hoax in order to oppress the American people. So because it's got so many different satirical bits to it, people can use it in all kinds of different ways.
The thing that sort of jumps out at me is the Pentagon Papers show how incompetent and corrupt just the information flow within the US government is. And yet this thing showing that these people can't really do the piss up in the brewery thing reinforces this idea that if peace was to break out, they were going to be able to do all of this stuff. It seems like there's this very strange confirmation bias going on with the Iron Mountain report, that despite all the evidence to the contrary, it's this thing that people seem to hang their hats on when they have nothing else.
Yeah, there's this really strange idea. I mean, I've actually just been writing a think tank paper, not about conspiracy theory, but about how people think about power. And there is this really curious kind of dual thought people have all the time, exactly as you just said, that simultaneously people in power are completely useless, and they also have massive total power and can oppress you with it. Well, which is it? It can't be both. You can't oppress people uselessly. I mean, you can be kind of chaotic about it and still violent, but fundamentally, you're either kind of, hyper-efficient evil cabal, or you're a bunch of shambling, failures and incompetence. And somehow that doesn't kind of, neither side of that contradiction sort of eliminates the other, because in the end, this is not logical. I'm not saying it's in any way stupid. It's based on, people have a right and are justified in thinking that power is problematic, and they should be suspicious of it, and they should ask questions about it. They should be critical, but on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of ghosts and monsters. And that, I think, is where you get that kind of weird mix of, people in power are incompetent, people in power are omnipotent and evil, is that it just, whichever thing you happen to want to criticize at a given time, one or the other of those is going to fit. And either way, it's just working on this very generalized sense that people in power are just bad.
In terms of when you went down the rabbit hole, I mean, I know that there's a link to Timothy McVeigh as well, the Oklahoma City bomber. What was the link you got to where you were like, oh, I think I might be losing my mind at this point?
Well, I did spend some of Christmas a couple of years ago when I was writing this, watching early Alex Jones documentaries, which wasn't all that festive. I think I watched 3 in 2 days, sort of Boxing Day and the day after, something like that. And that was pretty grim. Also, because the kind of subject matter that people deal with in this context is often pretty grisly in itself, right? And sometimes based on, reality. So that wasn't much fun. Obviously, thinking about the Oklahoma City bombing is very, very grim. And I went to the site and I went to the museum and I interviewed the district attorney's investigator who had been assigned to do the investigations for the county grand jury that was set up by at the behest of campaigners, including one of the bereaved, and a Republican politician I interviewed. So they set up this county grand jury to try and investigate the city bombing at the same time that the proper court case was going on. But this wonderful guy I talked to, Larry Dellinger, had also, because he was an officer of the law, had found himself very near the Murrah building when it was blown up, and went inside within a couple of minutes of the explosion and started trying to rescue people. And I didn't repeat in the book, and I'm not going to repeat here what he told me he saw, because it's deeply horrific. And, what difference does it really make about the particular details? So, there's the very sort of, this stuff becomes very, very serious, when conspiracy theory starts to kind of be extrapolated out into the real world. I should say that I'm not claiming in the book that this book directly influenced McVeigh. I am claiming, and I support with evidence that it was part of the broader kind of ecosystem of conspiracy thinking that he was involved with. And there are various different ways in which he may well have come across it. There was one of the key promoters of it.
There we go. We're going to come back to this with Patreon extra time, Phil.
Okay,
because
so
we've got 1 minute left, and we've got to ask you the Mr. Gammon question.
Okay.
Which is easy for this one, because surely if this report isn't real, Mr. Tinline, you doing what you are doing is exactly what those in power want us to do, to cover up the fact that this report is real. How are you not an agent of the overlords?
You got me. Sorry. Rumbled, finally. I've done a lot of interviews about this book and no one's caught me before.
Right. I think it needs to be called out.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that just keeps coming up in it, and we're gonna run out of time in about 20 seconds, and we've got so much more to talk to you about, Phil.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I hated to cut you off just when we did. So do you want to finish off just the Timothy McVeigh link? Because I think
because it's kind of important that I don't.
Yeah.
So one of the primary promoters of Report from My Mountain, as though it's real, is this extraordinary guy called Milton William Cooper, who, like a lot of the people who ended up promoting this, had done service in the military in Vietnam, and had come out and was a pretty damaged guy. He was an alcoholic, he was pretty violent, etc. But he ends up in Arizona running a kind of radio station from the top of a hill, broadcasting his sort of hourly show of the hour of the time, his daily show of the hour of the time. And there's decent evidence that McVeigh went to visit him. And so he'd been talking about, and that McVeigh was listening. We know that McVeigh was listening to his show because one of McVeigh's accomplices said so in evidence. And I found an edition of his show, Cooper's show, where he was talking about Iron Mountain at the time. There's various other ways that McVeigh may have come across this. We know he read Soldier of Fortune magazine. I found an advert for the book in there. It was doing the rounds in the militia movement as well. And it's in fact one of the significances of the bombing is that at that point people start to investigate what on earth these people think. What's this worldview that's leading somebody to go up to a federal building in this quiet, heartland city full of just ordinary people, civil servants doing their work, and a crash and blow it up with a truck bomb? Well, how have they come to see that as the enemy? And so that's when you start getting people really investigating. And there's this journalist I spoke to called Robert Tomshow. He was based in Dallas, worked for the Wall Street Journal. And he drove first to Oklahoma City after the bombing, and then out to a town called Eufaula in the far east of Oklahoma, very near Arkansas, and went to talk to people from the Oklahoma militia. And standing in the forest with these two guys. One's an ex-Vietnam vet. The sheriff kind of drops him off and leaves him. So standing in the forest with these guys, and they say, "Have you read Report from My Mountain? Have you read Report from My Mountain?" And the sense that it's the kind of the evil template for how the state is going to oppress us. And so it was definitely part of the ecosystem. But as I say, I'm not claiming direct link to McVeigh. It's possible, but it's not possible to prove it at this point.
We've not quoted too many of these so far, but we've twice allowed an important point to be finished. The other one was on the Holocaust. So I think making sure that loop is closed and we don't leave you hanging with people thinking that this was a direct link was an important thing. If any of the commenters on the interwebs are about to say anything different, that's why we've given Phil a few extra minutes there. Alex, what did you think?
Phil, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about the book. The book is Ghosts of Iron Mountain, The Hoax That Duped America and Its Sinister Legacy. And it is out now. You'll find links to buy it in your show notes. For all of our listeners, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Phil. But for our Patreon people, you get a little bit of extra time where we're going to stick with Phil and talk about the research and behind the scenes and look at how the book was written.
And we get to complain about Oliver Stone.
It's standard.